Clinical trials need a refresh. Digital can help.
I'm Amy. I'm a radiologist and founder at Hexarad, and I have a background in being an associate editor at the BMJ for 10 years, so read a few thousand trial papers, but not as experienced as the panel. So I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. Paul, do you want to go first and then move down the line?
Sure, thanks Amy. It's lovely to be here. My name's Paul Bogle. I'm an interventional neuroradiologist based in London. I'm a co-founder of several startups and also part of the BT Health Board. That's about it from me.
Cheers, Paul. I'm Mohit Khan. I'm a gastroenterologist in Wales, working in the NHS. I led the transformation of the neuroendocrine cancer service in Wales through patient centricity, patient outcomes, and I have various digital roles, including Health Technology Wales, appraisal of evidence.
I'm Rajesh Prakasam. I'm a transplant surgeon from London. So I'm a chief investigator of clinical trials in enabling, validating, and integrating digital technology in healthcare across UK and Europe and the US.
So my name is Satu Peltonen. I'm from INCSO. Our main focus is to ensure patient safety of diverse medical solutions, ranging from drug discovery and delivery, implants, software solution, and complex medical systems.
You might need to hold the microphone closer.
Okay, just let me know.
Yeah, that's better.
Great. So, and my focus is to ensure the patient safety, and clinical trials is like one part of the process. So, thank you.
My name is Sinead O'Connor. I'm a technologist by background. I work in the School of Medicine in Trinity College in Dublin, and we're looking at postgraduate and training and education in emerging technologies in health. So the technologies that we are predicting that will have the most impact across the spectrum of health. I'm also working with the European Health Data Space to provide guidance on the implementation of the EHDS across Europe. And in the past, I've worked with pharma and also within the hospital system.
Thank you, everyone. So the first question might be a little bit controversial, but just given that where we are, do you guys think that the way in which we're doing clinical trials and have been doing clinical trials is now outdated with the advent of digital technology? And we'll go to Mohit first.
Thanks, Amy. So, I think there are certain aspects which are probably outdated, but certain aspects which are sort of fundamentals to proving that something works. So if you want to know that a product or thing works in pharma, in clinical trials, if you want to know whether a digital health technology works, there needs to be evidence. Generating that evidence may not rely on some of the same methodologies as in pharmaceutical trials, clinical trials, but in essence, the fundamentals are there. What population are you treating? What is the study design? Importantly, what are the outcomes? What are the hard outcomes? Because some pharmaceutical companies have got into problems when they've embarked on clinical trials without the right outcome. So with digital health technology, what are the outcomes? Patient centricity, patient outcomes, and so that at the end of whatever evidence you're generating, you know that whatever you produce works, is effective, and it's safe, and it adds value. And I think there was a talk yesterday, and then there was a primary care lead who talked about whatever is going to be implemented from the digital space needs to work for staff and the workforce to make workflows easier to improve patient outcomes.
I can see you're nodding. You're agreeing.
I would say that, I agree partly, and I would say that it's a time to rethink how we do research. Because it's not going to be for all types of research. There are certain research where we can implement digital tools to enable and accelerate the process. Certain things which is more inclusive when you do digital technology in research, but certain things we have to do the old way. So therefore, I think it is not blind sweep of everything is going to be changed. It's just going to be which aspect of it. I mean, just a quick quote. We did a study during COVID where we recruited most patients in Europe for a diabetic trial in renal transplant patients. That was because of remote consenting and using remote tools. So therefore, it's really which aspect of it what we choose, and but certainly it's a time to rethink the way we're going to do them.
Yes. So I agree on that. The main point is to ensure that there are patient safety. That is, you have to have certain procedures to make that sure. But at the same time, the landscape for the whole clinical trials is changing. One problem is that you don't have enough participants for the clinical trials because people are getting more and more digital all the time. At the same time, you have the problem of diversity, because you want to include different, genders, age groups, ethnic minorities into the patient groups. And digital could be one part to enhance that, And secondly, you have to think about, like a digital person at the moment, because you have all these, whatever you are engaging with, you have the digital trackers, you have your healthcare in digital form, and all the possibilities. You would have to kind of think about how could you put this into standardized solutions that you could actually use for digital clinical trials. But this would need standardization, of course.
Yeah. Paul, I can see you're itching to say something.
Sorry.
Sorry.
So one of the talks that was given yesterday by a company called Aria Health, if I remember correctly, they were talking about creating a digital wallet based on blockchain where the health information for patients could be stored, and it's actively under the control of the patient themselves. And I think this is something that we should be looking at employing within medical trials. Because not only, if you use that almost as a baseline, what you could potentially do is have patients enrolling into your primary study, but then at later stages you could maybe go, actually, hang on, we've now discovered a secondary thing, are you okay with us using your data for this secondary trial, this tertiary trial? So all of a sudden a single trial starts to yield far more information than its original intention, and part of the problem that would solve is obviously speed, because the time taken to set up and run clinical trials and the cost involved with these things is ridiculous, and people don't really realize this. So if from one set of data you can actually start to get large amounts of secondary levels of data, actually you could start to make clinical trials far more efficient as well.
Thanks, Paul. Sinead, is there something you would like to add?
Yeah, I think I could add on the point as well that patient recruitment for trials and patient attrition in trials is always an issue. And I think with data and digital, there are possibilities to improve on that side of things. How do we know where the patients are? Can we use data spaces for each disease to know who the cohorts of patients that could be recruited? And then I think applying digital for remote trials, patient self-management within the trial, that hopefully can help improve the attrition rate. So I think it's not to change the gold standard of the clinical trial, it's just to augment it and ameliorate it with what we have available to us today.
That's good. Paul, I'm going to come to you in a second. I'm just going to see if there's any questions from the audience. If anybody wants to... It doesn't feel like such a controversial question now because everybody's agreeing, so... No comment? Okay, go on, Paul.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say as well, as a sort of follow-up to what you said, Sinead, is if you think about it, most of our population that requires the greatest health requirements are older patients. So you've got multiple problems. So actually, a single intervention, you might start to determine actually, especially if you're collecting all of this data digitally, you might actually say, well, hang on, this is a really good intervention for someone with, I don't know, a baseline of COPD, but actually, if you've got diabetic foot, actually all of a sudden this is really bad. And so just the mere fact that you can start to collate data in a sort of more coherent manner, rather than with paper forms and stuff like this, I think you can start to make far greater impact at far more personalized levels.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to, following on from the previous panel discussion as well, and the way this conversation's headed, how do you be inclusive with your patients when you're talking about using new technology? And you just mentioned diseases that predominantly affect an older population. How do you manage that in this new digital era?
So if I can take on that, I think that's extremely advantageous, having digital tools. So two of my NIHR trial applications has got patients on the application. So that just means that you don't need to involve them at the recruitment point. Because in London we have an advantage that we have 7 sites doing transplantation, which are the globally largest number of transplants done in a small area. So we included patients in the discussions, in the trial discussions. That just means that any trial you start, it has clinical endpoints and patient-related endpoints like PREMs and PAMs. So that just means that your trial becomes more stronger. You're getting more out of that, and having the patient included, which I think a lot of the funding organizations really value that. So that is simply possible because of the digital tools. Otherwise, it would have been difficult to get people with multimorbid diseases to come for meetings. So that really transformed the way we do them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's several points within this point, and you've got patient outcomes and co-production, and then Paul's talked about the population, and traditionally you would go, well, this is the population that we're going to do this study in, but actually what Paul's suggested is that there could be multiple sort of populations as long as that can be analysed in a statistically robust way. But in terms of then encouraging sort of that, you don't want to be, it overlaps with the last session in terms of digitally excluding people, and I think there has to be better ways of having champions and advocates through trials that may be resource heavy. And in clinical practice, that is sort of happening. Certainly, I think in the hospitals in London, that there are various sort of administrative roles that have tried to bridge technologies to those digitally excluded populations, which I think is going to be important because most of the health needs are in that older population.
Sorry, I think Satu's been waiting patiently, so we'll let her come in first, then I'll come to you, Paul.
Yeah, I want to get back to the point. There's a really a large amount of data that you can use. These days you can collect from one person individually. But you have to notice that all data is not the same. You have a lot of variations between whatever you're using for measuring, for example, like what is happening at the moment in your body. So first problem is like, okay, where do you want to recognize which can you actually use for digital clinical trials? What are acceptable point of the data? And how do you can gather this as a standardized form so that it could be actually improved in the regulatory process, because you can kind of develop different solutions for this, but if the regulatory process does not see them as a viable solution, then you have a problem with that also. So that is kind of like one of the points. But I see that there's like a lot of different potentials. And I'm seeing that this is probably going to change in the future because the regulatory authorities, they already haven't taken a notice of these possibilities in a way.
One of the other things that I was going to say is, I don't know about most of the people in the audience, but if I'm giving quite a large piece of paper to read, how much do I actually retain? We're asking most of the patients to read quite complicated stuff and then consent to it when they're already under stress from whatever medical condition they've got, and we're just presuming that that's going to be fine for them. And it might not be their first language. The language itself might be quite complicated to understand. Who knows? So digital could be used in a far more simple way, which is just, here's a video for you to watch that explains why we want to recruit you into the study. You can shift the language if you want to use it, if you want to hear it in a different language. All of these sorts of things. You can ask questions. Do you understand this? Yes, click the button. Do you have questions? What are they? Etc., etc. So you can even have a far more inclusive way of consenting people to enroll into studies, and then you can use the same sort of software and packages to remind them, please turn up for your clinic appointment, we have to follow you up, etc., etc. So you don't have to make things complicated to make them effective. In fact, often it's the complete opposite.
Yeah.
Do you not read all the blurb when you sign the Apple agreement and the updates, Paul?
Of course I do.
Yeah. Sign your life away.
I mean, that's a fantastic point. It's providing the information in a using digital tools. So one of our trials, we used an app for patient information and consent during COVID. So that just means that that consent is a continuous document for the patient, not one-off piece of paper which we give it to them. What that did was not only it increased recruitment, it helps with the retention of the patients. So that really transformed the way we looked at it. And now, at least in NIH and NIHR, they are actively supporting digital consent because it's a continuous conversation for the patient and a reminder for them. I think that's, yeah.
It sounds like you're all saying that we should be using technology to make the process much more simplified for the patient.
I'm absolutely not saying that. I think we should stick with bits of paper with really complicated language that no one understands.
That you have to file in the notes somewhere.
Exactly.
Or you're sacked off the panel. Sinead, did you want to come in and say something on this?
Yes, I think the digital divide is something that we always worry about. Older cohorts of patients, and as the gentleman from the audience said on the last panel, that even if you're very attached to your technology, once you're sick, something's wrong with you. Once you're scared, it all changes. So I think, and I have gone out sometimes with the preconception that older patients may be more reluctant, but I found 90-year-olds quite happy to have Alexa in the house, and then 35-year-olds that want to sit down and talk to somebody face to face and have something on paper. So I think we need to just be mindful of these nuances and tailor things to the different patient cohorts.
If I may add, this is actually one of the problems in clinical trials because you have patients rolling in, but they don't really get much feedback on what's happening in the clinical trials on their side, So, yeah.
I would 100% agree with what you've just said, Satu. I think my experience with trials and just in life generally is if you provide feedback to people, actually the engagement that you get is so much more. And actually people who've enrolled within trials, they've done it with the underlying ethos of going, actually, yes, I might get a benefit myself, but actually I might be of benefit. Yes. And so the fact that we're not engaging people is actually really actually bad and quite stupid.
Yeah, that was actually what I was referring to, the patient engagement, because, everyone wants to know if you kind of go into a clinical trial, then you want to know what's happening and you want to know, how it influences me.
Sorry, I'm just going to change the topic slightly to be maybe controversial, maybe not, I'm not sure. We've spent a lot of time talking about how technology and digital trials can benefit the patients. But is there ways in which it can benefit the clinicians or encourage more people to become involved in doing research and becoming academics and, continuing to improve medicine for the population as a whole? Who wants to answer that one?
I mean, it's a fantastic question, simply because we need more people to get into academics, and it is often seen as a hard work, to start off and setting trials up. What at least in UK, NIHR supports co-investigator roles. So my trainees are recognized co-investigators. They don't get much money for it. They do get time for it. So that's the one way of including people. And second way is using these formats, what we're talking about, digital tools, to educate trainees. So there are training courses which are a lot more easier to gain than the other ways. So in that way, you have more people who can commit time to research, and I think that's extremely essential, and so we need that.
I think, again, coming back to, there's almost a role for digital just in the recognition of time that has been spent on doing something for the clinical trial, which is not easy to track if it's paperwork. And so if you're a junior doctor or whatever, and you're kind of, you're explaining, look, actually, it took me 6 hours to sort this thing out, and that my 2-hour session doesn't cover this. So I've spent an extra 4 hours of my own private time doing all of this sort of stuff. If that actually is recorded in a more meaningful and usable way, then actually that can start feeding back into the systems to say, actually, if we really want to engage and get more people into academic medicine enrolling into trials, maybe we need to give them a bit more time, a bit more space, a bit more support. So that starts to feed back into how are we going to fund these things, how can we speed it up, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a lot to be said for just digital there at that very early stage as well.
Mohit, you look
I
like you
think
have...
if you, again, it was a talk from yesterday in primary care, if you make workflows easier and integrate in the workflow so that it's very efficient, then you'll encourage more people to get involved in this space.
Go on, Satu.
May I? Yes, there are 2 points that were not really taken into consideration that people tend to forget. First is the real-world evidence, and the second is the diversity that I already mentioned. And I think digital clinical trials, the digital part could be one part that could enhance this. First is the real-world evidence, what you get from the patient itself, and then through data, of course. And then it's a diversity, because then you get more population, patient populations into it. And this is also one part that the regulatory process they want to enhance this so that you can actually get your solution through the process. But at the moment, how I see it, the digital is not quite ready yet. It have to be, put into the right process as well.
We're rapidly running out of time, but Sinead, did you want to comment?
Yes, I think to some of the points of earlier, we're seeing that researchers are seeing both the automation of things like consent and some of that bureaucratic overhead that puts them off doing research, that has been a little bit more streamlined, and also because there is so much new legislation or talk about legislation that ethics committees and the various steps within research organisations are getting a little bit more standardised and easier to approach. And I think as well, we haven't spoken about sensors, but as one particular technology, continuous monitoring through sensors offers such a wealth of information and new information on trials. So I think it's the most exciting time to be involved in clinical trials because we can put technology to really useful purpose.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience, very quickly? Oh, yeah, I've got to get my roving mic out. Hang on.
Thanks, Amy. I'm a student here, I'm a GP, and I've looked after patients in primary care for a long time, and primary care has never been used for trials, mainly. Your point about terms and conditions, it's all about trust when you're signing something. I've met those patients who've read all their terms and conditions and spotted companies who've tried to take their data, and we've got to change the mindset. So my bit is, can we get our patients' trust? How can we make those terms and conditions, or just have some trust in there that patients know that actually clinicians, when they're recruiting them, there's nothing hidden in there. So some standards, I think, probably about how this is done, and make it really easy for patients to understand this is for their benefit and nothing else at all. So I think there's a trust element. As much as digital is good, I think we've got to have that basis of trust, that we're doing something good for them and not to do any harm.
Thank you. Someone want to comment? We're actually out of time, so maybe we should just do some closing statements from Sinead coming back down the line, and if you wanted to comment on the question very quickly.
Yes, I think I have done some research recently with patients on their belief of how their data should be handled, and we were surprised at how positive patients were about their data being used for research to make things better for future patients. So I think, and it's key from this session and I think the session before, basing the digital need around patients is something that would both benefit the trial and benefit future knowledge within the area.
I'll give you one sentence, Satu, because we're over time.
Sorry. So I get back to the sensor. So as mentioned, there's a lot of data from personal, individual through sensors and so forth. But to get this to work, it would need some standardization and also to see where are the right data points that you should include to the clinical trials.
I think for me, the sessions like this is really just 2 takeaways. Patient inclusive and research without borders are possible now. I think that's the key thing for me.
Go ahead.
Answer that that question. Sort of doctor-patient relationship is historic. So I think we've got to be thinking about how that evolves. But take-home messages of patient inclusivity and carers patient outcomes, think about population and value in health.
Paul, you've got 10 seconds.
So I would say that for me, digital health, digital trials, they're all coming. As clinicians and as society, we have to accept that. But what we need to do is, as you sort of mentioned, champion the relationship, because that's not going to go anywhere, and you can't get rid of that. So as long as the relationship is based on truth and trust, digital is just another extension of the core principle of being a good medic.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening.